Hello, YouTube. First of all, I want to say I have a Discord. I've had it for a while, but I keep forgetting to mention it in my videos. But if you want to go and talk with other people about philosophy, then you should check it out. The link to it will be in the description of this video. So what I want to talk about today is something a bit, maybe a bit silly, but I think there's an important point to it. So there was a conversation that occurred, maybe a bit of a joke conversation, concerning the question of whether a penis is an epistemic topic. Like, why shouldn't we talk about penises when we're talking about epistemology? Why is that not just an epistemic topic? And okay, so this again, may have been a bit of a joke, but it got me thinking about like, well, okay, let's take this seriously. Like, what sort of role could a penis have in epistemology? And it struck me that one of the most famous arguments in epistemology is is a stuffy old boar holding up his hands. Um, so More's argument for the external world, his famous argument, it goes like this. Here's one hand, here's another. So there are at least two objects in the external world. So the external world exists. And this has become this kind of Morean argument has become actually a very famous argument against skepticism of the external world. Um, and I mean, the general sort of the way that Moore is arguing here, his point really is, look, the proposition that I have a hand, or that I have two hands, the proposition that I have a hand is more plausible than any philosophical premise that you might use in a skeptical argument to against the claim that I have a hand, right? So the proposition I have a hand, that's more plausible than a proposition such as if I don't know that I'm not dreaming, I don't know that I have hands, right? If I don't know that I'm not dreaming, I don't know that I have hands. That's a kind of skeptical, philosophical sort of proposition, right? But maybe we can see the appeal of that. But surely the proposition I have a hand, um, like that's clearly much more plausible. So for any skeptical argument against the external world, the thought is that you can just reverse the argument, right? Like the skeptic will have a certain set of premises, premise one, premise two, premise three, conclusion, right? We don't know that the external world exists. But we can just reverse it. We can just say, no, we do know the external world exists. Because, for instance, we know that we have hands, right? So we do know the external world exists. So one of your premises must be false. That's the general kind of Morean move. It's essentially an invitation to compare plausibility, right? It's much more plausible that I have hands than that the skeptic's premises are correct. But then the question is, well, what exactly is plausibility here? And I take it that plausibility is going to have some sort of emotional component to it, right? So if you think about the kind of the common sense propositions, such as I have hands, these propositions strike us. They strike us in some way. They strike us forcefully. That's what it is for these propositions to be plausible. We find them almost kind of irresistible. We like pulled to believe them. I mean, maybe they actually are irresistible. Maybe we can't help but believe them. The point is, it's not a matter of reasoning, right? Like, I don't reason my way to the view that the proposition I have a hand is highly plausible. That's just how the proposition strikes me. It's not like a matter of reasoning, and that sort of that plausibility, being struck by its plausibility, that is the kind of data, as it were, the initial data that the Morean argument is drawing on. But with this in mind, then I can't help but wonder if whipping out a penis would actually be a much stronger argument for the external world than just showing someone my hands. I mean, certainly if I like if you imagine some philosopher pulling out her penis, that's going to make a much stronger impression on the audience. I'm reminded of this idea that's quite popular in philosophy, that skeptical arguments lose their force as soon as you leave the seminar room, as it were. As Hume said, right, carelessness and inattention is the only remedy for skepticism. But certainly, like it's a common idea that the minute you stop thinking about skeptical arguments, the minute you leave the seminar room and get on with the business of everyday life, they just lose their force, right? You just find lots of beliefs about the external world being kind of imposed upon you. And I wonder, could there be a better way of making your audience inattentive to skeptical arguments than just pulling out a penis? So, I guess the point is, right, is that the success of More's argument seems to be dependent, at least partly, on what we might think of as like gut reactions, right? So when I say, here is a hand, or like, here are two hands, when I make that claim, I hold up my hands and I say, here are two hands, right? That just strikes us as obvious, as undeniable, as more plausible than any, abstract philosophical premise. And then the point is that, right, if some philosopher comes along and just pulls out her penis, that I suspect would strike people even more forcefully. It would be, so for somebody to get up on stage in the context of like an academic philosophy seminar and just be waving a penis around, that is behavior that would kind of demand a response. It would demand a reaction. Like, who cares about hands? I see hands all the time. I see hands even when I'm in the seminar room. Even when I'm in the seminar room talking about skepticism, I'm sitting there and I'm looking at other people and I'm seeing their hands. So how can, like, holding up a pair of hands, how does that sort of make me mentally leave the seminar room, as it were? I mean, it doesn't, right? Just showing me a pair of hands isn't going to make me feel differently. It's not going to make me see anything differently. I see that all the time. Somebody pulls out a penis, like that will impress itself upon me. I think that another sort of thing that's maybe going on here is that taking out a penis kind of violates social norms in such a way that it will elicit kind of moralized reactions. And I think that moral responses, moral reactions are, in some way, they do seem to me to be connected to belief in an external world. If I take seriously the idea that, like, I'm just dreaming right now, then it looks like it's not obvious, why I would feel any sense of like moral obligation or duty or anything like that. Why would I care about how I act towards other people if those other people are just figments of my imagination? It doesn't seem like that would really matter to me. In a dream, you can do whatever you want, right? So there's kind of a like maybe a sort of pragmatic case for an external world where it's like, there's a pragmatic case for belief in an external world where it's like, well, even if we can't, even if we find ourselves unable to like rule out skeptical scenarios, we should just assume that there's an external world, because if we think that there isn't an external world and we're wrong, that would be, morally disastrous. We would end up just treating people awfully, or whatever. Like we wouldn't feel any kind of constraint on our behavior. We might end up treating other people in really bad ways. Whereas if we believe that we're in an external world, that there is an external world, and that other people do have minds like ours, then then we're going to treat them well, and it doesn't really matter if we're wrong about that. So we should assume that there are other people, and that those other people have minds and feelings and so on. Now, so like the point is that moral reactions, I think, seem to kind of be connected. They seem to involve belief in an external world in some way. And I think it's just generally the case that, like, moral reactions do in some ways seem to kind of drive like our descriptive beliefs. Very often you find that people will react morally and then they kind of search for justifications which will appeal to factual claims. So, there's like famous cases like the research that Jonathan Haidt did, where he gave people scenarios which described cases of incest, for instance. And the claim that he made was that the way that people tend to respond to these is they have an initial moral reaction where they say, like, it's morally wrong, and then they'll search for a justification. Where they might initially say something like, well, it's morally wrong because these people might end up the woman might end up getting pregnant, and there's the danger of like genetic abnormality, and that would cause a lot of harm to the child that's born. But like you find that if you then state the scenario in such a way that rules out the possibility of harm, people still have the same moral reaction, and then they just search for some other justification. So the point is that we have like these initial moral reactions, and then our beliefs about the world are like downstream from that. We have the moral reaction, and then we adopt whatever beliefs about the world we need in order to justify it. So the thought is, okay, somebody at a philosophy conference about skepticism, somebody comes along, they come on stage, they pull out their penis, and that's going to elicit moral reactions in the audience, and then the audience will find themselves just kind of compelled to take it that there is an external world, that this is not just a figment of their imagination. Because if it's just a figment, if this is just a dream, or if they're just a brain in a vat, or if they're just being deceived by an evil demon, who cares? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter that they seem to be seeing a philosopher on stage waving her penis around. Who cares, right? But they do care. They do care. So you'd better believe it's real. So I think that there's a sort of Morean argument appealing to, which involves, let's say, pulling out one's penis. And I wonder if that might actually be a more powerful Morean argument than the standard Morean argument involving holding up one's hands. So that's one sort of way of kind of getting the penis into epistemology. But then I thought, well, there is another way to look at this actually as well, which is that I wonder if the penis might function as a skeptical response to More. So the More comes along and he gets on stage and he holds up his hands to demonstrate that there is an external world, right? Here's one hand, here's another. So there are two objects in the external world. Isn't that just obvious? But then the skeptic, in response, she gets on stage and she pulls down her trousers and reveals a penis. And my thought is, well, maybe this behavior is so bizarre. It is so unlike how a real academic philosopher would behave, that it forces those of us who are non-skeptics to at least slightly increase our credence that we are in some way living in a dream world. It's just so strange that now of course there are lots of explanations for this, right? So we see something that's bizarre. Obviously this works better the more like conservative the philosopher in question is. So ideally, it would be, we want somebody who is who is just generally very kind of conformist and not the sort of person who would get up on stage and pull out a penis. But really, I think any academic philosopher, it's quite unlikely that they would get on stage and pull out their dicks. So let's say we see this happening. We see her get on stage and she just takes down her trousers and reveals a penis. Now there are now this is just puzzling, right? Like something weird has happened and we feel the need to explain it. Okay, so how am I going to explain this? And there's lots of ways of explaining it. It may be the case that the philosopher has had some sort of mental breakdown. Maybe they've gone insane. It may be the case that the philosopher has been offered an enormous amount of money, to do something weird, to do something like this. Maybe the philosopher is also working as an artist, and this is actually like some sort of artistic performance or something like that. So there are these other explanations, but then I take it that we could also rule out these explanations, right? So it might be that like I can I can talk to the philosopher afterwards and like establish that actually no, she's not insane. I can look at her wealth and see that she hasn't received a lot of money. So yeah, if we assume that just an average academic philosopher whose mind is functioning normally gets up on stage and pulls out a penis, at least it's bizarre enough that it at least prompts the question: Am I dreaming? Or maybe we can sort of explain this in other ways as well. Like, okay, not just as a dream. Maybe think about like the simulation argument, right? Like, so there's this kind of famous argument from Nick Bostrom, which says that like if we assume that that human civilization will get to the point where we can create simulations of intelligent beings, then actually then really that shows that we are very probably already in a simulation. Like if it is possible to create simulations of intelligent beings, and if civilizations enact that possibility, then the vast majority of intelligent beings will be simulated. That would suggest that we're in a simulation. So we could further increase the credence that we're in a simulation if we see the philosopher get up on stage and pull out a penis. One explanation of this is, well, maybe this is just somebody in another civilization like running a simulation. Maybe there are some psychologists who are curious about how people respond, how people behave when social norms are violated. So these psychologists are like running simulations involving people pulling out their penises in socially inappropriate situations. And I take it as well that the more of us skeptics, or the more of us who are at least sympathetic to skeptical arguments, the more of us who come along and just pull out our penises, the higher the credence should be that we're that this is a dream world, right? Like the better it functions as a response to more. So I guess in many ways I'm presenting this as a challenge to anybody who is sympathetic to skeptical arguments. I think if you're if you're really committed to philosophy, if you're really committed to following the argument where it leads and to presenting the best possible arguments for your positions, then maybe whenever you encounter a Mauryan who says like, well, here are hands, maybe the thing you should do is pull out your dick. And like, if you're really committed to it, that's the challenge. Okay, that's what you should be doing. Okay, so look, maybe this was a bit of a silly video, but I'm not actually sure that it's so silly. I think that there's genuinely a kind of interesting point about epistemology and about Mauryan arguments and how they function. I think there might actually be something interesting here, which is why I have talked about this for nearly 20 minutes. So anyway, that's all for today. Thanks for watching.